Welcome to OLLI's Authors Out Loud, a series of discussions with authors, exploring their books, delving into the inspirations for their characters, themes, and stories, as well as discussing the craft of writing itself, the trials and victories authors experience seeing their work to completion. I'm Jean Greenlaw, and today we are speaking with Megan McDonald. What a great opportunity to congratulate Megan on a significant milestone. This is the 25th anniversary of Megan's popular Judy Moody series. It is loved by readers around the globe. The Judy Moody series has been translated into 18 languages, and more than 22 million copies have been sold worldwide. Judy Moody and the Not Bummer Summer was adapted into a movie with Megan writing the screenplay. And we celebrate another exciting milestone, the launch of a new series by Megan, the Fairy Door series. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction.
Well, we try to make it as good and representative as possible. Now, you've worked in a bookstore as a librarian and are a very successful author. You've been a published writer since you were in fifth grade when you wrote a story about a pencil sharpener. It's easy to say that your entire life has been in and around literature. The influence of how growing up with four older sisters helped to inspire your craft of writing is inspirational to all of us who can't get a word in edgewise. Can you explain how your ability to communicate went from a stuttering start to becoming a successful and much beloved author?
Okay, well, you can imagine with growing up with four older sisters, um, our dinner table was very talkative. And my dad was an iron worker. He would get home after dark and mom would wait dinner. We had a big round kitchen table, and my dad was just a born storyteller. So he would always tell us stories. And I grew up at the dinner table hearing all of these stories orally. But with four sisters, they also each chimed in and told about their days and told their stories. And I was the youngest of five. So by the time it got to me, I started to stutter because I couldn't ever get a word in edgewise at the dinner table. So my mom was trying to think of how she could address the stuttering. And she went to the bookstore, and a very wise bookseller, instead of giving her a book about stuttering, gave her the book Harriet the Spy.
Oh,
And
one of
mom
my
brought the book
favorites.
home, Harriet the Spy, with a little spiral notebook for me. And she said, Harriet is a reporter and she observes everything in her world and she writes everything down. So if you feel you can't speak it, maybe you could write it down. And that was really the beginnings of me carrying a notebook everywhere and writing down all of my thoughts and observations and feelings. So I went from stuttering and not being able to speak to being able to express it through writing in my notebook.
How perceptive. That was a wonderful thought.
It
And
was a
Harriet
real
the Spy
gift.
is a wonderful book.
Yeah,
Absolutely wonderful book.
it's
Uh,
really endured, and it's over 50 years.
I
So
know, I know. It came out when I was a doctoral student at Michigan State, so it's been around.
yeah, yeah.
Now, your first book was Is This a House for Hermit Crab, which was featured on Reading Rainbow in 1991. It's a wonderful book, and it uses onomatopoeia and it has a touch of science, and it builds tension in such a short story. It's one of my all-time favorites. I
Oh,
used
thank
it
you.
for many years in my university classes and school workshops as an example of a perfect read aloud and a great way to teach, to introduce onomatopoeia. I used to tell my students, you can teach any skill with a wonderful children's book. You do not need worksheets. You do not need to drill. You need to read a
Exactly.
beautiful book and call attention to something in that
Yes.
book. And it just moved me. And normally I never used a book twice because I wanted to bring new books, but I used your book for at
Right.
least 10 years. because it
Oh,
was so perfect in those ways. And it is a great read aloud, which I love. So, how did you come to write this book?
well, it's interesting that you've picked up so much on the readability, the read aloud ability of the book, and that comes directly from I worked as a children's librarian for many years before I was writing, and I would give story times, obviously, at the library. And so somebody gave me these wonderful cloth puppets. One was a hermit crab and one was a fish. And I tried to find a story about a hermit crab that I could use and couldn't find any. So I made up this story, but I developed it by telling it aloud to kids at the library. And as a children's librarian, of course, you would know this, but whenever I told a story, I would always put the book out so that parents could then check out the original source, right? So I would tell this hermit crab story. And as it developed over time with the kids, we would do the scritch scratch
Right.
sounds and they
Yeah.
would, call and response. They'd do it back to me aloud. So it got developed that way. Well, then the parents all came to me and said, "Where's the book? How come you didn't put the book out to check out?" And I said, "Well, it's just a story I made up in my imagination. It's not a book." But that kind of planted the seed for me that this really could work as a book. So then I got the idea to take the sounds that I did with the kids and each little episode of the hermit crab trying to find a new home and try to put that down in writing.
Well, it certainly worked, and I'm glad they asked for that book. And you've written a few other picture books, but you basically have come to fame with your series books. What motivated you to change direction?
Well, I was writing picture books for probably 10 years. And when I first invented or imagined Judy Moody, um, it wasn't quite a picture book at the beginning, but I had all of these, as you can imagine, growing up with four sisters, I had all of these funny family stories, just little vignettes or episodes that were just funny things that would happen to us as kids and very universal, like catching the toad in the backyard or playing a prank, on a sister. So I was trying to just put down all these stories and I wrote them um almost like a beginning reader in a way originally, and but more I was just trying to get all the stories down. Well, when I finished all these stories, I had like 20 of them and they were all little episodes, and I thought, well, I can't have 20 books, right? So I wasn't sure what to do, and I was speaking at a conference where I met who the person who's now my editor, Mary Lee Donovan at Candlewick Press, and we were talking about it and she said, well, send me the stories and I'll take a look. So I sent them to her, and after she read them she said, if you could think of a connecting thread for these stories, like a unifying theme in a way, then you could have a short chapter book for kids that would be very episodic, chapter by chapter. So really, I have to credit her with the inspiration of making it into a chapter book, which when I did the first one, we had no idea it was going to be a series. But because I had so many stories, once I had the character of Judy Moody, I felt it was bottomless that I could just keep going with
Right.
stories about the characters.
That is
The
wonderful.
very first book that became Judy Moody Was in a Mood has the most stories that are from my own childhood. And then after that, Judy took on a life of her own, and I
Okay.
went beyond the childhood stories.
It's great. You described Judy Moody as an 8-year-old girl who's kind of spunky and independent minded. She has a lot of moods, lots of ups and downs for kids to recognize. But despite that, she meets every obstacle with a sense of humor. I absolutely love the fact that you use humor to help Judy navigate through family, friendships, school, and life in general. What a wonderful message for all of us, not to forget the fun in the midst of the struggles. So much has happened in the world in the past 25 years. How do you manage to keep this series current and meaningful while still maintaining a storyline that keeps the children clamoring for the next book?
Well, that's interesting because I think for me, in a way, Judy Moody isn't current because so much of it is out of my childhood. But what is current, or what is, I guess I should say, an everyday kid like Judy, who has a lot of flaws and a lot of struggles and ups and downs, but also is very passionate, very enthusiastic, always wants to get her friends in on some new idea. So I think that those are universal things that we all know and that kids feel all the time. Kids connect with Judy Moody so much because they have had a bad day before. They know what it's like to have a bad mood. And of course, not all the moods are bad ones, but those are part of real life. So I think there's a lot of universality about the character of Judy Moody that is what keeps it current and keeps kids interested in her character and her world because they see themselves in their own lives. Kids think Judy Moody is real often. And, I've had kids come to my signings thinking they're going to meet Judy Moody in
Judy
person,
Moody.
or they write me fan letters that are addressed to Judy herself. So that was something I never expected. But of course, I think in a way it was almost accidental or serendipitous that I hit on a nerve or hit on something with kids where um, they started to understand that, oh, this character is like me and doesn't always do everything right and doesn't always get it right the first time and has to deal with some disappointment. And how do you deal with that? So one time in one of the books, Judy tells a fib and then she starts to itch all over and she just can't stand it. So she has to come clean. So these are all things that I think kids relate to.
And you do, though, put in things such as interest in climate, keeping our own community clean and those kinds of things. So you've managed, without being preaching, you've managed to put those into your stories.
Yes, I've tried to pick up on things that kids are interested in themselves, and kids are passionate about the planet, saving the earth, recycling, all of those kinds of things. So in Judy Moody Saves the World, they really connect with that quite a bit. But I also try to um, give Judy experiences that aren't just Judy has a birthday and Judy goes to camp and Judy does all,
Right.
so for example, in one of the books, Judy goes to college. And that sounds so crazy for an 8-year-old, but she has a math tutor who's a college student and she gets to go to the campus and experience some of the things about college, which was really fun to take an 8-year-old and put her in a completely
Right.
different environment. Or in another book, this is my favorite Judy Moody book. It's called Judy Moody Mood Martian. And in that book, Judy tries very, very hard to stay in a good mood for one whole week, which for her is difficult. But that was a really fun book to write because it sort of turns the character on her head. And I got to have her come up with ways that she dealt with to try to not to try to fend off the bad moods. So, and kids do ask me about that a lot, especially right around that 8-year-old third grade age. Kids begin to think about moods and they always ask me, can you write a book if you're in a bad mood? Or what do you do when you're in a bad mood to get out of a bad mood? So they're thinking about this a lot themselves.
Did you ever imagine that Judy Moody would have such a long run? We're celebrating 25 years.
I can't even wrap my mind around that. It's funny because now I have a lot of college students and young women beyond college who come to my book signings because Judy Moody was their childhood. That's what they read when they were in third
Mhm.
grade. It's the way I feel about Ramona Quimby, who was the
Right.
8-year-old that I read about, my age. So it's such a thrill to have these young women come to me and talk about what Judy Moody meant to them in their lives. So I never that's when it really hits home that Judy Moody has been around for a long time. Some people even now who read Judy Moody have their own children and want to read Judy Moody to their kids. So that's where the longevity begins to come in. But I never planned that or imagined it. And as I mentioned, when I first wrote Judy Moody, I thought it was one chapter book. But I had so many of those stories when they first put the manuscript into pages, and they were trying to make it easy for kids who would just be starting to read a chapter book.
Mhm.
So they used large print and lots of white space, lots of illustration. Well, the book came out to be like 300 some pages. And they said, oh, this is way too long for the age group. So I had to go back to that first manuscript and cut maybe almost half of it, and a lot of the chapters that I cut, I saved. And then later, my editor said to me, you have all these other Judy Moody stories now that we didn't use. Maybe they could become another book. So we kind of just went book by book. And as long as I had ideas, my editor was willing to support me. And of course, then as our readership and our fans grew, we wanted to keep the fans happy and keep Judy Moody coming for the
Right.
readers. So and
Yeah,
it
they're
really
always
started.
looking for the next one, so you have to
Yes.
giving them that next one.
Yes. Like I love to read mysteries. And of course, I feel the same way. If there's one book a year of the author I like, I think, why can't they write faster? I want the next one.
I'm the same way. Like
So
Richard Osman right now. I love the Thursday Murder Club books. And
yes, me
why
too.
haven't you gotten the new one out yet?
Exactly. Exactly. So I know that as a reader, so I understand when readers feel that way too. Like, why can't you write faster? Why can't you write fast enough?
Oh, well, in all the writing you've done, Judy Moody, the American Girls series, and so many others, what do you want readers to take from your books? Is there a common theme?
I think we touched on this at the beginning, but I think really this isn't something in the books per se, but this is what's behind it for me is I think life asks a lot of us, whether you're a child or an adult. And if you can meet some of those hardships or challenges with a sense of humor, and not let it just take you down, I think that's really, really helpful. And I started out telling the stories the way I thought I would enjoy them. So I didn't even intend it or try to be funny, but I just wrote about what I find funny. And I didn't really realize at the beginning that humor is so powerful because it cuts across all ages, all barriers, all colors, all everything. Who doesn't like to laugh? And so, and again, this was not really intentional because I would write what I find funny, but I didn't realize at the beginning, some of the humor goes right over the kids' heads. So the kids find things funny like the Toad Pee Club, joining a club where the toad squirts out some liquid and it's like peeing on you, right? That's very childlike. But adults find a whole nother layer of humor that sometimes goes over the kids' heads. And so the humor became really central for me. But the other thing I think is, as a writer, we're trying to give voice to feelings, and finding your voice or finding a voice for your writing is to me the most important part. And I think especially with characters like Judy Moody and Julie Albright, a theme that came through those and became very important was um, having a child find their own voice and realize how powerful that can be. And to be able to stand up for yourself or speak up for yourself was really important to me. So that's kind of a theme through my work as well.
It's interesting that you've put those very powerful themes within a humorous setting, that it
Yeah.
comes through without preaching. It's, it just becomes a part of the book from book to book to book, which they get it over time.
I think that's the power of the humor, exactly what you're saying, because I'm not saying, here's a sibling squabble and here's how you solve it. I'm telling a funny story about Judy and her little brother Stink and how they come to terms with, maybe an argument or a disagreement they're having. And so it's not a message per se, but it's you're learning through story how these things get resolved or solved. In one of the books, well, first I should back up and say, I get lots of fan mail from my readers. And one thing that comes up over and over that really surprised me is they always say, could Judy get in a fight with her best friend? So Judy has a best friend named Rocky. And I realized this is something at that age that kids start to experience where they have some kind of wrinkle, with their best friend and something happens. So I remembered growing up, sometimes with all these sisters, you'd get mad at your sister and you'd say, I'm not talking to you. Well, we would talk to each other through another sister, a third
Mhm.
party. So we wouldn't literally talk to that sister. So I have a whole chapter in one of the Judy Moody books where Judy and Rocky have a falling out. They're not talking to each other and they go to Stink, and Judy tells Stink what she wants Rocky to know, and Rocky then tells Stink, and he has to be the go-between. And it's very funny. It's one of my favorite scenes, but it really says something about how to get through some of these typical sibling or best friend
Right.
squabbles.
You mentioned before the librarian who gave the book to your mother. Librarians are so important. They know so
Oh,
much and they really learn who their patrons are, I believe. And I asked several librarians, I'm going to interview Judy Moody. What question do they want to ask? So here are two questions from
oh,
our,
interesting.
our Denton librarians. Um, Judy Moody is such an interesting character. How did she first come into your imagination? And you've really talked a lot about that. But if you could just kind of pinpoint one thing.
Well, you may have guessed by now, Judy Moody is me. So I've got the messy hair and all the collections, and I have a lot of moods, very much like her. So that's part of it. But she's also, as I said, sort of an every kid. I really have to say, this has never quite happened this way before, but so much of Judy Moody came with when I got her name. So
Mm,
because she had a lot of moods, I thought of the last name first, being Moody, which is a real last name. But then I made a whole list of first names. And when I thought of Judy, I was like, oh, it rhymes. It sounds funny. So I came up with the name Judy Moody, having no idea now that for 25 years I've gotten real letters from actual people named Judy Moody. But but making that up in my imagination, that character crystallized for me so much around just coming up with her name. And that was really
mm,
what started it all.
great. The other question was, you mentioned Stink a moment ago. Stink has really grown into his own series. And what inspired you to give him the spotlight for his books?
Well, Stink, because he's the youngest sibling, I completely relate to Stink being the youngest of five. So I really wanted to also write from that perspective. And I noticed when Stink is in all the Judy Moody books. So when I wrote about them, kids would tell me Stink was their favorite character. Well, one day I was visiting a school in Vancouver, and all the kids came into the classroom. All the boys sat up front, and I looked out at the audience and I realized they all had their hair spiked and they had these big oversized t-shirts on and their short, and they were all dressed like
Like
Stink,
Stink.
and they had a little chant and they came in and they were like, Stink, Stink, Stink. And I said, what are you guys doing? And they said, we are here to tell you that we think Stink should have his own series. and we liked the Stink character the most. So I was telling this story to my editor, and again, in her brilliance, she said, well, what do you think about that? What if you did write a book where Stink was the center of the story rather than Judy? And that gave me an opportunity, both since I have no brothers, to imagine a little brother, but also um, to be able to tell stories rather than the big sister, also from my point of view as the youngest.
Wonderful. They will love those answers. Now, you mentioned having collections. In the past, you've talked to children about the value of collections and following your passions. I've read that you have a Band-Aid collection. I was going to put this over my nose, but I thought that would be a little too much. Do you have a Bugs Bunny in your
I
collection?
don't.
I will
Good
send it
one.
to you. Okay. And you got the idea for Judy Moody to be passionate about the environment from a Band-Aid with a globe on it. I've got two very special collections for me. One, and they're both down at my alma mater, which is Stetson University in DeLand,
Nice.
Florida. One is a collection that I've collected over 50 years. I know I don't look that old, but I've collected these over 50 years, and it's almost 2,000 autographed first editions
Wow.
by authors over that 50 years, because
Oh,
that's how
wow.
long I've been involved in this business. And my second collection is a collection of autographed books from the authors whom we have interviewed for Authors Out Loud. And these collections are very special to me. In fact, I invested in a room in Stetson's library where
Oh,
where these two
oh, that's
collections are
wonderful.
displayed. So would you tell us about your Band-Aid collection and any other collections you have?
Well, ever since being a kid, I was a collector. Judy Moody, you'll notice, has some unusual collections. One of them is ABC gum, which is gum that's already been chewed, ABC.
Oh,
So and it sounds gross, but I was always reading as a kid, and I would be chewing gum and I'd take the gum out and stick it on my nightstand. And then that way, the next day I could chew the gum again. So poor Judy has all these crazy collections. Well, I don't collect ABC gum anymore. But when I first wrote about Judy Moody, she wanted to be a doctor when she grows up. And she admires Elizabeth Blackwell, who was the first woman doctor, first woman to complete medical school. So I decided, well, maybe she would collect Band-Aids. That's something that's doctory, right? So in order to write about that, I had to go to the store and see what kinds of Band-Aids kids would be able to buy. And I couldn't believe the range of Band-Aids that were out there. So I started with just a few, and one of the first boxes that I got was so cool. It was a box of Band-Aids where they had had a contest and kids could send in a drawing and try to get the drawing printed on these Band-Aids. So every Band-Aid in the box was drawn by a real kid. And of course, I opened them all to see what the drawings were. And one of the Band-Aids, it was drawn by a fifth grade boy, and it had a picture of the globe or the planet with a Band-Aid drawn across the globe, and underneath it said, heal the world. And I loved that so much. So just that Band-Aid falling out of the box became the inspiration for Judy Moody Saves the World. Well, since then, people know I collect Band-Aids, so they've sent me all kinds of crazy things for my collection. So I have Bigfoot Band-Aids. I have bacon strip Band-Aids where it looks like a piece of bacon. I have duct tape ones, pirate Band-Aids, all sorts of things in my collection. So it's always growing. But I also like to collect um, things like I collect sock monkeys. A friend of mine made me a sock monkey from those old brown socks that have the red heel. And so that started the collection. And then I have ones in different colors and of all different sizes. Um, and for some reason, I have always loved, you were talking about collecting dragons, but I've always loved dragonflies. So I have a collection of all things dragonfly, and that Dragonfly became an important character in my new series of books that we'll talk about fairies. So I'm always, oh, and then the last one I'll tell about is I have a really great collection of erasers, and they have erasers now that you can take apart, you know, and they have several pieces, and there's animals and all sorts of things. So I have a jar about this big with my eraser collection.
Wow. That sounds wonderful. Now, you just mentioned that you started a new series, the Fairy Door Diaries, with the chapter book Eliza and the Flower Fairies. Impressively listed as editor's pick on Amazon and the best children's book of the year for 2025 so far. So that's a pretty nice start. What made you decide to write a new series and a fantasy book?
Well, it's funny because it actually grew out of in the Stink books. One of Stink's best friends, her name is Elizabeth, but she has people call her Sophie of the Elves, and she likes things that are from that world. So it started with I was actually going to write a spin-off from Stink and write a book about Sophie of the Elves. But then when I started to do it, I realized Stink and Judy are like real kids, and they are grounded in a real world where kids go to school and, you know, all of that. So I thought, well, I can't really delve into the magic with if they're centered in a real world. So I thought,
Okay.
okay, I'm just gonna put that character aside and start a whole new character who can go into a magical world. So I was visiting family in Minnesota, and we were walking around one of the lakes there, and I saw at the bottom of this big tree, this was years ago, but a little tiny fairy door. And it was so intriguing because it was made out of, you know, sticks and moss, and it had a little doorknob. It was so intriguing because you felt like you could open the door and the fairies would come out, you know, who's behind there?
I
So that kind of caught my imagination. And I thought, oh, I'd like to do a book where a character opens the door and gets to go into a different magical world each time. So Eliza of the Elves is the new character. She finds a little fairy door in a land under the stairs in her house. And when she opens the door, she gets whooshed into, in each adventure, a different kind of fairy and a different magical world.
what difference are you trying to convey in this series that's different from your others?
So it's very, very different because since it's not grounded in reality, anything can happen in a world that's magic, right? So I would say one of the big differences is that I can deal with good and evil. I can have good fairies and bad fairies. And I can have a character who is always the heroine who tries to rescue something or save something or answer a riddle or whatever it takes to try to make that magical world turn, if it's upside down, to turn it right side up again. So that allowed me way more freedom than if I had to stay
Mhm.
grounded in a world like ours.
Will your dragonfly appear in each of these books?
Yes. So Eliza, when she goes, she has a little pin, which I have, of a dragonfly. And when she goes through the magic door, the dragonfly comes to life. And a lot of magical characters have a familiar, they call it, which is like your totem
Mhm.
animal, who's kind of a protector, but somebody who goes along with her and plays a role. So hers is a dragonfly named Haiku, and Haiku goes with her on every adventure. And
Okay.
then when she comes back to her real world, Haiku becomes the pin that's pinned to her overalls again.
Very good. So it's something kids can look for. You know,
Yes,
hey, where's the dragonfly? What's it going to do this time? You know, so it's
absolutely.
something they can be anticipating to see what's going
Yes,
to happen in this
absolutely.
story. That's great.
Yes.
You mentioned in previous interviews, and you mentioned at the beginning of ours, that you carry an idea notebook around with you. You started writing because your mother got you started with it. Do you still have a notebook that right
I,
there?
s- I,
Okay.
I started out, um, with those 99-cent composition books that we had
Right.
as kids. There's a composition book for every Judy Moody book and every Stink book that's
Huh.
just full of my ideas and scribbles. But then, because Judy Moody and kids are passionate about recycling, I found decomposition books.
Oh.
Are the old composition books made of recycled paper. So now these are what I use. This is my pocket size one that I brought for travel, but I usually have a bigger one that I can fill up. But I always have this with me because you never know when an idea is going to come to you. And I'm often scribbling on a napkin or the back of a checkbook receipt or something like that. So it's nice if I have one place that I can keep track of all the ideas.
You sound like Dolly Parton. In one of her books, she actually shows some of the napkins she's written on, the backs of receipts and so on.
Exactly.
So
That's
when an
when you're
idea
a
comes, you
writer.
need to get it.
Yeah, when you're a writer, you're always looking at the world through those writing eyes. And so I don't want to forget the thoughts or the ideas I have. So I'm always scribbling on something.
Do you have an idea you can share with us right now from your book? What's an idea you wrote down?
Well, it's kind of a secret.
Oh,
um,
well,
but I'll tell you a little hint. It's going to be a chapter book, kind of like along the lines of Bunny and Clyde, about this length, and but it's all new characters, and it has to do with a very unusual class pet that is not what you think. That's all I
oh.
can say.
How
I don't
soon are
want to
you going to
jinx
have
it.
this? I can't wait to get it.
It's
Well,
mostly scribbles in the notebook still
right.
at this
Okay.
stage, but
Okay.
I'm hoping by being at the residency on Peaks Island that I'll have time to develop and
Oh,
begin writing it.
so you can be a writer as well as a teacher at Peaks Island. So that's great. That's going to work out for you.
Yes, absolutely.
So now
Yeah,
we
there's
you
time to do your own writing and
right.
then time to give back to the community.
That's great. We asked that you read aloud for us, and I see you have some of your books. Do you have a selection you'd like to share with us?
I was gonna read we haven't talked much about Bunny and Clyde, but this is a new series I started last year with wonderful illustrations by the main artist Scott Nash. And this is very different. It's a very funny book, but because it's animal characters, it's very different for me. So I'm going to read from the beginning, and you'll see that the importance of reading in libraries always comes through, even if you happen to be a rabbit and a chipmunk. It's about two friends, Bunny and Clyde, who they are always good and they do everything right and everything proper. And one day they start to wonder, what would it be like to be bad? And they set out and decide they want to be bad, but they have no idea how to be bad. So they're gonna try to figure this out. So this is from the first chapter called No Good. Bunny and Clyde were tired of being good. Every day, Mama kissed Bunny and said, "Be good." So Bunny was. Every day, Papa hugged Clyde and said, "Mind your manners." So Clyde did. Every day at school, their teacher told them, "Raise your hands, follow directions, use inside voices." So they did. But Bunny and Clyde were tired of making their beds. They were tired of saying please and thank you. And they were tired of keeping burps to themselves. They were done playing nice. They were done being told what to do. One morning, on their way down the sidewalk, Bunny spotted a bubblegum comic. She picked it up. Clyde spotted an old bottle cap. He picked it up. Along came old Lady Murphy. She patted each of them on the head and said, "What a pair of good little bunnies." Bunny hated being patted on the head, and Clyde hated being called a good little bunny. He was a chipmunk. She thinks we're picking up trash, said Clyde. She doesn't even know that we're treasure hunting, said Bunny. So, on that one perfect Minnesota morning, Bunny said to Clyde, let's be bad for once. Bad to the bone, said Clyde. There was only one problem. Up to now, Bunny and Clyde had always been good. The two Goodnicks did not have the first clue how to be bad, but they did know one thing. When a baffled bunny was looking to learn something, and when a curious chipmunk needed information, there was only one place to go. Are you thinking what I'm thinking, asked Bunny? Are you thinking what I'm thinking, asked Clyde? To the library, said Bunny and Clyde at the same time. So Bunny and Clyde raced to the library, and they go in and they ask the librarian, do you have any bad books here? And the librarian says, well, I like to think we have good books at the library. And of course, as you might have guessed, everything they try to do where they try something bad turns out to be something good.
And we go to the library again. Yes.
Mhm. Always.
Uh, we've talked to other authors in the past about the ways that the lessons and revelations in the book for children are also meaningful for adult readers. You mentioned earlier about some of the humor goes over the kid's head, but goes to the adults who might be reading. How do you feel about this? That are you hoping that adults are going to get things in the books?
Absolutely. I think, you know, Judy Moody books are some of the first books that kids might first chapter books that kids might be reading on their own, but many parents and teachers read them to kids that are younger and read them aloud. And I think for that experience, you want the adults to be just as engaged as the kids, and you want adults to be interested in the story and interested in the characters. And I feel so gratified when parents come and tell me we're reading Judy Moody a chapter a time at night, but I can't wait for the next chapter. So after the kids go to bed, I run down and I read ahead. So that to me is the highest compliment that an
Right.
adult or a grown-up would want to keep reading Judy Moody.
Do you drop any Easter eggs in the book for adults?
I probably do. It's not intentional, but it always seems to come out somehow.
Okay. Now you've talked about the multiplicity of series that you have. How do you decide what series you're going to write a book on next? How, I really need to get that next Judy Moody, but I'm feeling this series over here. What motivates you to decide this series or this series or this series?
Well, a lot of motivation are deadlines, believe it or not.
Aha. Aha.
So when the publisher has a schedule and they want a book by a certain time, that certainly is motivation. But I think too, sometimes as a writer, you always want to grow, right? And you want to try new things. So having done Judy Moody for 25 years, I feel like that's like the comfortable old soft t-shirt that you wear.
Mhm.
That's what I go back to in my comfort zone, but I want to push myself too. So writing fantasy was very different
Uh,
for me and much harder to do. And even writing animal characters was very different for me. So some of it is comes naturally of wanting to grow as a writer. Some of it is also scheduling that, you wait a long time while the illustrator works on the book. So maybe I have some downtime while I'm waiting for the next Judy Moody to be done. So I start something new. And with Bunny and Clyde, again, I didn't plan it as a series. I started with one book and then realized I had more ideas and adventures. The fairies, I did think initially would be a series, probably a set of 4 books, one for each season. And as I said, each one with a different type of fairy. So that one I kind of imagined as not a series as much as a set of companion books that would go together. So,
Interesting.
um, yeah.
You might get talked out of that depending on on the response to the books.
Yeah, I had no idea how popular fairies are and how much so many bookstores and libraries have their own fairy gardens and kids go to fairy camp. Who knew? So it's a universal topic, but for me, I like to take I did a lot of reading and studying and learning about the mythology of different kinds of fairies, and I like to weave that mythology into the book. So, for
Mm,
example, like in the first fairy book, when Eliza goes through the fairy door and she arrives among the flower fairies, she can't see any fairies in the magical world, and she's given a bracelet made of thyme, the herb thyme. You can see it up here.
mm.
And as soon as she puts on the bracelet of thyme, she can see the fairies. And that came right out of I didn't make that up. That came out of fairy mythology that I read about
Hmm.
from fair. There's a lot of mythology in Cornwall and Ireland, in that area of those countries. So so I weave a lot of that kind of mythology into the books as well.
It's interesting that you do research for these books that are for young children, yet the background is really important. Talk to us about your need to do that.
Well, the research to me, always informs the story. So, for example, maybe Judy's going to a pencil factory on a field trip. Well, what do I know about pencils? What do I want to know about pencils? What would make pencils interesting? The fact that one pencil can write 10,000 words might be a fact that I learned from doing research
Huh.
that I then incorporate into. I went to an island once called Cedar Key that's off of the coast of Florida, and it's where they literally had pencil factories that where they first made cedar pencils. So, um, I didn't start out thinking Judy uses these grouchy pencils that I just made up. I didn't start out thinking I've got to do all this research about pencils, but when I go and delve into something, I just find all kinds of fascinating stuff that ends up working its way into the story. And I love nonfiction, and I love how, like, Stink is very interested in science. So every book of Stink has a lot of science, and I have to do research to be able to talk about that. Like in one of the Stink books, this was years ago when a group of scientists got together and they kicked Pluto out of the solar system. They decided
Yes.
it was no longer a planet. And I was so unhappy because I grew up with 9 planets and Pluto was one of them. So I studied about Pluto and read about Pluto and wrote a whole book about how Stink tries to champion the cause of Pluto and get it to be a planet that can come back into the solar system.
That's, I know you go to a lot of school visits, and what do you take away from them? What do those school visits give you?
School visits are wonderful because you are immersed in your readers and you see kids of all different ages, all stripes. And for me, it's people always ask me, how do you know so much about being an 8-year old? Or how do you even remember anything that happened when you were Judy Moody's age? Well, first of all, I like to answer with a quote that Mark Twain said, where he says, I remember everything, whether it happened or not.
Not.
so, so that gives you an insight into how it can be
Mhm.
embellished. But by being with kids and among kids, kids are just so interesting and funny and inquisitive, and it just puts me with my audience of readers and puts me back into what it's like to be that age. And for me, that's inspiration in and of itself. Um, so that's probably the most important thing for me, is that it keeps me in touch with kids and what they're thinking and what questions they ask me and what's important to them. Same with the letters I get from children, what they're thinking and the questions that they want to know are just so telling and help me to better my own characters.
What do you hope they get from your visit?
Well, it's funny because you go into a school and you see kids once and you don't really know what the impact of that is. But for me, I hope that enthusiasm and love of reading is what I hope comes through, because before I was a writer, I was a reader. I grew up as a reader, and to me, that is the most important thing in my life. So I just hope that the power of story is what comes through to them and connects me with my audience.
Well, what is the either funniest or most inspiring thing
Mm.
a kid has ever said to you on one of these visits?
Oh, wow, there's so many, but kids are so funny. Well, first of all, many kids who read my books become Judy Moody experts or stink experts. So they are often correcting me because, of course, I may have written the book 10 years ago. I don't remember something in the book, some detail, and I'm already on to the new book that isn't out yet. So, for example, I get letters from kids who tell me that, it's really not good to feed raw hamburger to your Venus flytrap. And I looked it up and sure enough, they're right. So
They're like, oh,
so I love when kids really get into the material and like to tell me or write to me about that. But probably I would say the most inspiring thing from a kid has been um, one of you mentioned all the different countries that Judy Moody is published in, and one of the countries where Judy Moody is most popular is the Ukraine. And through my Ukrainian publisher, I was able to do a Zoom session and speak with kids and talk with kids in Ukraine and take their questions. This was a few years back when the war there had just started. And I had a child who told me that literally he was in a bunker in a basement in Ukraine while it was being bombed, and he had a Judy Moody book and he was reading Judy Moody in this bunker, and he just said, it was so scary to him, but to be able to read something that was funny, that made him laugh, just changed that experience for him. And you know, that's probably one of the most powerful things that I've heard from
I
kids.
have goosebumps just
I
having you.
know, I know. I get teary just telling
Yeah.
about that.
Oh my goodness. Well, you've taken us on a journey through decades of masterful writing, and we've had a great conversation. Is there something we didn't ask that you'd like to tell us? Did we miss anything?
Wow, I don't think so. I think we touched on so many things, and I think the last thing that we touched on about the school visits has to do with just the importance of story and the importance of reading. And I know for me, it's shaped my whole life from being a reader as a kid. My dad used to tease us, and in order to really get us, he would take one of our books and he would pretend he was going to rip out the last page of the book, and we would never know the ending.
Ending of it.
And that was
Oh.
like the worst thing you could say to a house full of readers. So I know we have screens and games and so much competition, but I really, really hope that kids still, I believe that who doesn't love a good story, kids and grown-ups. So I just hope we continue to always find our way to a good story.
Well, your insights leave us with both laughter and imagination. And I know we all look forward to more wonderful characters and adventures from your many books. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been great.